Thank you. Thank you to you all for being here tonight. That's quite beautiful to see such a full room. I want to also I have to do also my little bit of thanks. Henrietta Moravčíková, if I pronounce it correctly. Okay. And also Susanna Beniachova, is that correct? From Goethe Institute. And of course also Friedrich Dahlhaus, but I guess he's not here tonight. So I was very happy to be invited. Also, it's quite a pleasure to be here in Bratislava. I've never been here. I had a co-worker in my office last year for 1 year long, Igor Machata, and he's a PhD student now at the academy, and he told me quite a great deal of the city, so it would be great to come back also with my partner, Sivan Linden. So tonight I'm going to, it's going to be many slides, but some of it will go a little bit slower, then it will go faster. So I won't say something for each image, but I think it's, just tell me if it is just over the top. I'll start with what Henrietta introduced already, Architektuur in Gebrauch, Architecture in Use. This journal I do together with my partner, Sivan Linden. It's somehow research that started from our curiosity about architecture and the way we look at architecture. And the first question we ask ourselves is that in magazines we always look at these images of architecture that looks brand new, that has been built yesterday, and nobody really lives there. And instead, we're always kind of drawn to things, artifacts, architectural artifacts that have expressed a life, a transformation, a way of not necessarily an appropriation by the people living in it. In a way, architecture has a life of its own also. In a way, it decays, it degrades, or it transforms, or it interacts with the environment, with natural processes, as well, of course, with the inhabitants as well. So that's something that we always look, and we always find it very interesting, and a way of looking at these artifacts was to look at them in a serious way, was to say, okay, we take one artifact, one architectural structure, and we make it into a booklet. And in this booklet, we look at publications being published way back about this architecture, and then we do a documentation of the moment right now, in the present. And so we do drawings and we take photographs, and we ask people who lived in it, or we ask the architects who built it, and we do interviews. So it's a very easy format. It's sort of slightly larger than an A5, and it allows us, it's very cheaply done, and it allows us to sort of integrate whatever is interesting. We don't cover the entire thing. We just highlight what's interesting about this thing. And somehow we always stuck a bit with the artifacts from the 70s or from the 80s as well. But in this case, there are 7 of them, but we keep going. In this case, I'm going to show you the last one, which is about, the light is needs to be this bright, yeah? Okay, fine. The last one is about Bagan, which is a temple area in Myanmar, in the dry region, the Mandalay regions in Myanmar. It's a very beautiful area, and we did it together with a PhD student, Clara Rellensman. She's been researching this area for a long, long time. She's a heritage researcher. And what it's an incredible area because there are 3,000 temples and pagodas there. And they were built between the 11th and the 13th century after Christ, Anno Domini. And what's interesting about this area is very different from Angkor Wat, which is, I don't know if you know, in Cambodia, which is an area that is very touristic, and it's sort of dead in concern to daily life. There isn't very much activity that happens there beside tourism. In this case, this area is very rich. There is rich agriculture. There is manufacturing is very strong. And people live there. They live adjacent in the proximity of these temples. So they perceive them as a living architecture. I mean, they're not structures that are decrepit and falling apart. They're really there, and they're still alive, and they have a meaning in their own daily life. And after, it's a very complex story. There was a series of earthquakes in the 90s, especially, that destroyed many of these temples, these pagodas. And what we concentrated on a main pagoda, my main temple, which is called Dayamadzika. And in the area, in the periphery of this temple, which is very much visited by the people, by the inhabitants as well as tourists as well, there has been a course of restoration that has been very radical, because from ruin, I mean, this you see on the left side, this is what used to be in the 90s, they turn out to be like this. So it's really like a reversed sort of history in a way, where things suddenly become brand new. And it's a very peculiar, maybe ambivalent way of looking at heritage. Is it still heritage? That's the question. I mean, that's the main question. It's been debated also by the UNESCO for a long time. Finally, this place has been declared, it has been enlisted in the UNESCO Heritage Places. But this is the way things have been done so far. Also because there was a political situation back then in the 90s where the main generals who were administrating the country, or you could say also some sort of dictatorship, they were sort of giving away the pagodas as a mean for the people to acquire a place in paradise, in nirvana, in a way. So that's if you give your money for a pagoda, then you acquire a higher hope to eventually in the afterlife to have a better situation. So that was a bit of an ambivalent sort of programmatic political program. And, but at the same time, it talks for a place that is very much alive and a heritage that is very much in transformation. I'm not judging this. I find it a bit disturbing that elements are produced industrially. In fact, there are only 3 companies working there, renovating these temples, and they produce some of the ornaments on top of the doors, or some elements are really mass-produced, which is incredible. But in the same time, it's a different way of living this historical artifacts. So that's also the take of this PhD student, Clara Relenspan, who interviewed the generals, also set up this program. So it's kind of a very interesting story, and for us also to see a reversed sort of engineering in a way from before and after, and also trying to display that how do you inform this kind of story within a booklet? How do you show it? And so we started doing this kind of juxtapositions of before and after. And this is just the title work. So just to give you an idea of one of the latest booklets, when we talk about use in architecture, we think of it as an aesthetic category, which means for us use, it's really the feedback loop that happens between form, between space and use, and also daily use and daily enjoyment of a space. And trying to sort of find the interface that sort of defines this kind of relationship, which can be very diverse depending on the artifacts, depending on the conditions, depending on the architecture. I don't know, I can quote, I don't know, we found finally a philosopher that deals with use as an aesthetic sort of category, not necessarily directly use. He talks about Das Tun, it's Ernst Cassirer, he's an Austrian philosopher. He talks about the daily operations that a person has in the world. And these daily operations, the doing, doing things every day allows for a person to mentally organize the reality of things. So in a way, we see this very much connected to architecture as an empowering element to organize mentally the reality of your world. So that's it. Just leave it like this, otherwise it becomes too... I'm not a philosopher, obviously. Now I'm going to go through a series of projects we did, and somehow one of the first projects we did, we started our office very late somehow in our life, in 2006. And the first sort of larger project for us, we're a very small office, even though we're called Offices for Constructivism, because we like to keep it big and sort of a bit beyond the reality of things. We like constructivism also as a philosophy, is a way of constructing the world or rethinking reality or inventing reality also in some sort of ways. So we're fascinated by that. And but so going back, we're a very small office, and this is a gallery we did, an art gallery we did in Berlin. It's a restructuring project, and it was kind of a fascinating building. This is the entrance, and I'm going to maybe talk about a little bit more about the entrance later on. The building is a printing facility, also a press facility that was built in the 1950s, adjacent to the Berlin Wall. It was near also Springer Verlag, I call it Springer publisher, which is a very high golden tower in nearby, and it was really like it was like a center of newspapers and publishers. They were really close to the east side of the city, somehow in dialogue. Well, somehow it was a political statement, obviously back then. Anyway, this is this area. This is just a section of this building. It's a very large printing facilities. Then later on, it was turned into different kind of businesses. It wasn't used anymore for the press, and so the entire space, which is a frame structure. It's a very simple frame structure, very beautiful. With lights with skylights that come in from the shed hall in the middle side. This is the front that displays the offices. It's a very, very simple structure, but it wasn't, when we found it, it wasn't anymore visible. It was all filled in with walls and with structures, with infrastructure, and so you could not really read it. And the first thing we like to do is to read how an architectural artifact has been constructed and how it works spatially. The galleries themselves also were very curious about the structure, and they wanted to make it also a theme inside for the space. So they were not interested in the white cube per se. And in fact, we started to develop together with them the idea of a gray cube. Not only because the space is painted gray and we have different sort of nuances of gray, but because we wanted to make the structure of the architecture being part of the gallery. Not the white cube, as you know, is a canon of in art in a way. It's a space that is abstract and that hides all the technical infrastructure behind the walls, and leave sort of white walls for the art to be displayed. And instead, we tried to sort of, instead of this abstraction, we sort of went for the ambiguity of the place, a place that can tell story. Maybe each room can be very different and can be dealt with also in a very different way. And the first thing we were challenged in this structure, I mean, we were challenged with certain situation here, was that originally, of course, the printing facilities were placed in the shed hall here in the back, where you have a sort of a very, very high ceiling, a very, very, very general situation, and you had the offices in the front. Immediately, there was a decision to place the art exhibition in the large hall in the back. But how do you convey the information of this exhibition space for the front? In the front, we decided to put the offices here. So in order to sort of reverse, sort of this sort of series of events, usually you come in the gallery, you usually come immediately into the exhibition space. In this case, it's reversed process. So we decided to take one shaft of this structure and only use it for the entrance. And this is what came out of it, which is a geometry that is really doesn't belong to this frame structure. It's something very new. It's almost Baroque in a way, where you have this entrance that is empty. It's not really used for exhibitions, but it's an inviting space that is gray, and it's sort of suggestive of something that is beyond it. In this case, it's rounded, and it sort of creates this focusing towards another space in the back. And when you step beyond this staircase and you enter the room, you enter the lobby, which is a somehow larger space. And you can see it here. And from this space, you're taken into the large hall. In this way, you amplify also the effect of this very large space at the end. It becomes really a dramaturgy that tells a story. And it's somehow an architectural foreplay in a certain way. So I was talking about the gray cube sort of concept and how you make each space special and with a certain narrative to it. In this case, these are the offices. The offices are also conceived as a place that they could be used for exhibitions. In fact, they did. And in a few moments and for a few exhibitions, they also used the space in this case. And you see they're rich in color. They also have a certain texture in it. They also have this large staircase that was meant for public viewing, perhaps, also for lectures, not for the people to sit there, for an audience to come in and also use this space. But regularly, it's just an office. So, in a way, this gray cube came about by cleaning up the place and making it more complex. I don't know, that's cleaning up in terms of taking out all the walls that were there, that covered up the sequence of the spaces, that was practically made it unreadable to the viewer. Clean it up and then redrawing an idealized space of the existing. So which means that we overlap, juxtapose another layer of geometry by exactly, creating this special entrance with this curved wall. In the back by adding things that are not really there. Perhaps this is a better drawing that shows what we added as elements that are sort of enforcing what's there and the structure of the place in itself, and at the same time they're added to it, so they don't really exist. It didn't exist in the first place. No, sorry. Oh,
the orange one.
Orange one. Thank you. But then I need to. This
will escape.
Will escape. Okay. Thank you. So we added elements that don't belong here, but in the same time reinforce the sequence of the pillars. So the black, of course, is existing. The gray is what we added. In this case, I don't know. There are many different spaces. In this case, this is the kitchen. Where we added another pillar that is just a drywalling element, but it reinforces the structure, the rhythm of the way the structure works. What else? We also added drywalling all the way here, and we made it go up to the top. Perhaps this is a. Okay, maybe this is a better example of what I'm saying. This is a column that you can see here in the, it's kind of I hope it's not too boring. This is a very large pillar here in the middle, and it's, of course, when you enter the space, this is the round space, then you enter the lobby, and you face this element. From this side, we made it thicker, because from the main hall, you look at this, and it looks like it is part of the wall. From this side, it's still readable as its own pillar that is being sort of enlarge sort of, that's sort of a large space. But we left all these artifacts that are part of the infrastructure that are also visible. And so in order not to, it becomes ambiguous. You really have to look at it and you start thinking about it. What is this? Was it always like this? Or has been changed or the size has been transformed? I was talking about we use drywalling to hide the infrastructure behind the walls. And this drywall went up to the top of the roof. Because it is part of the space. If it would have stopped here, it would have been visible that it's only for a certain purpose, or for a certain functional purpose. Instead, it becomes part of the space. So the drywalling really goes up to the top. Another thing that we like to work with is circulation. We think circulation is one of the keys in architecture to make a space more malleable, more lenient, in terms of appropriating it, using it. We think that more ways, more paths that lead to the same space is better than just one path, that more doors is better than just one door. And we like to move in circle. In fact, that's one of our favorite topics. And in this case, there are many ways to move inside the gallery, also because of the necessity of the galleries themselves, because they have here a private showroom, which is only for special clients. And they wanted to have an access also that goes into the back, not only through the main exhibition space. So we were able to convince the neighbor to give us a piece of his room, which is a storage room we cannot access, so that we could make a secret passage from the kitchen place and the office place in this way. So they would go inside. So in a way you can certainly move in a circle within the space. But the other way to thematize, to make it into a topic, the fact that there are different kind of usage and different kind of paths, is also to have very different doors. So we have, for each space, we have a very specific door. In this case, this is a hidden door. You're not supposed to see it. It's almost invisible. It's usually locked. Let me see. In this case, this is the connection between the lobby and the office. We have a 3-meter wide wall, folding wall, that you can place. You can define which opening you need, but like you can make it completely closed and you can make it into a wall, but you can make it completely open and open up. And you can also define the degree of accessibility, how much from this public space you can look into the office in a way, or you can enter the office. This division wall is, perhaps I have a picture here. Yeah. It's almost a furniture. It's made out of wood. And the door is part of this module because it's made by different kind of paneling, a sequence of paneling, and one of the panels become the door. Here you see the folding wall on the side. There are many different, very banal decisions, but in the same time, they were very important for the space in itself. Here we have folding doors. They're like a binary door, like 0. They don't exist, so they make a wall, or they are completely open, 100, so they open towards the video room, the video rooms. These galleries deal with many different formats. That's also an important information. They don't only have paintings or sculptures, they also deal a lot with installations, multimedia installations and videos, which is kind of interesting. That's why the requirement to make different kind of spaces. Okay, I'm now going to tell, there are so many other doors, you have no idea. Yeah, this is just a view from the office in itself, in the back, and you see these fake pillars. And we thought fake elements to reinforce the real story that is happening there. It's always very difficult now to talk about fake reality or fake, because it's been very much misused in the past times. But in architecture, it's somehow something you can, I always value to play with elements that look like something, but mean something different, and maybe lead you to ambiguous stories or multifaceted stories, very diverse stories. So in this case, this pillar is not real, this pillar is not real, this one, of course, it is real, and so on. So that's what we, which is not really, only maybe to the eye of an architect it might become really, might appear, but perhaps also to a regular viewer, some things will click. Okay, the budget wasn't big, it was very small, and we also about reusing things that are already there, not to discard, to make everything even and clean, but to look at the things that are there and possibly reuse them. That's also something that we like to do. In fact, we worked a lot with very small budgets. We like to do that. Somehow, we don't, it's not, oh no, it's good, but constraints can really push you to find solutions that are original. So that's, in this case, these are the heating elements, which were blue and they were placed way below. In terms of the heating potential of these elements, now they don't work as well as they used to when they were placed down below. But they became aesthetical elements for the space. So we placed them in the middle, in the axis of the ridge, practically, of the roof of the shed hall. And we pushed them above. On the ground floor, you know, the typical white cube has a concrete floor, a very, very clean, beautiful, polished usually. In this case, the floor was rubber tiles, very large industrial rubber tiles with knobs. And so we took them out, we cleaned them up, and we put them upside down. So you have this very weird, when you come into the space, the feeling under the foot is soft, and there is a rich sort of rubber feeling, or also the look of it. It's almost like varnish in a way, the look of the material. It's very beautiful. Rubber, caoutchouc is an amazing material. So we were lucky to be able to use it. We could have never, the galleries didn't have the money to make a new floor. And also the time constraint was enormous. We did this in 3 months, so this project. So that was very, very quick. So that's it for that. And then sort of like to give you a little bit of like the way we work. And we basically, that's sort of somehow the rules we follow many, many, many times. In this case, it's a very small project. It's a restructuring of a private apartment in Panco. It's a very run-down apartment, a very simple, very humble house in north of Berlin. And sort of it was a combination of a primitivity and sophistication, also based on the ideas of the user, the owner of this apartment. For him, the bathroom was the most important element. It is a playground. It is a dark room. So this is a place where he's using this place the most within the apartment. And it's done in a very expensive way. And it's just a drywalling, and it's a vaulted ceiling in this case. But it's all drywalling, built in a very, very, very simple way. It's been varnished with fiberglass in this case, but also in a very expensive way. And the floor is black rubber. I don't know if you can see this a little bit of this. Here, also the primitivity of the space is also enhanced by the opaya. The opayon is the opening in the. You probably know, in the Pantheon, when you have the opening in the ceiling where you enter the light, and also the smoke can go out. And this is the only light source for this space, and it's indirect light, because on the other side there is the kitchen with the real windows and the real light coming in. What's sophisticated about it, I would say maybe expensive about it, are the bathroom appliances, of course. They're all almost Donbracht. I don't know. This is of course, a rendering of the space in itself. These are the elements that are the most expensive in the entire thing. And one detail about combining sort of primitivity together with sophistication was the fact that we don't have a tap here for the water, for the sink, but we're using the hose from the shower, which is, I don't know if you can see, maybe the drawing is better, it's more visible. It's a rubber hose from Dornbrach, also this company, but we designed this prototype for the holder. You can take it out and use it for the shower, and you can also place it on the sink and use it for the tap water for the sink as well. This is customized element in chromed brass, very cheaply made, constructed, and compared to this is, it's a very inexpensive element compared to the prefabricated elements that the client wanted. Okay. In this case, that's another. I'm talking more about our early projects, and then I'll go quicker for the next ones. In this case, this is also a rule that we like to explore, which is, Adolf Loos, of course. One of his main topics was the extrusion of the ground floor in the space, which means you have a ground floor that sort of expands into the verticality. So you explore, you experience the space in all its complexity, in all its dimensions. And this is something we always think about, even the smallest projects we have. In this case, it was, again, it's a private apartment, and the owner wanted to have an extra room, and he wanted to have also a room as a wardrobe. So it was very difficult, but we have very high ceilings, and we did these 2 extra rooms in this room in the back. It's 3.60 meters in the height, and you can see it probably better here, maybe here, yes. You enter this gallery space on top from the previous space, so we have the staircase here. You end up on a lower sort of level on the gallery before you enter the alcove, the gallery, with the space where you can sleep practically. That's an extra bedroom. Below, you have sort of like a wardrobe space that you can enter and you can use. Of course, here it will be much lower on the side, but the space. So we have 2 spaces within a 3.60 meters height, and in a way, it was quite satisfactory for us to achieve so much in so little space, in a way. This is, I see Igor Mahata, sorry, that's I heard that. He worked also with us in this project, which is also in Berlin. It took many years for this project to happen. It's a former factory that was built in 1929. It's a listed building, and it was for the renovation and the repairing of omnibuses, or also tram in Berlin. So the entire area was actually used for this purpose back then. The building is this black thing on the side of the Landwehr Canal, and also meeting the Spree River on the side. So it really goes along the river side. This building then was part of the death strip, also during the division of the city. This is the yellow area, is the death strip, where the Berlin Wall used to run. And the building is the only building in Berlin that was part of this wall. It was physically the wall. And it was still in use. It was operative as a factory building during the division. But at the same time, there were soldiers walking on its roof. And the entire facade was, entire windows were closed off. From the windows that were facing the river were closed off, and they became a wall, a continuous wall. Then after 1989, it was taken by artists, and it became sort of like a administrated sort of artist collective. It's not a collective, it's a club, you call it Verein, it's in German. It's an association of artists, and they built a studio space inside, and are still using it today. Together with them, we made a proposal to the city, actually to the Lottery Foundation, to receive money to renovate the place, but to do it's mostly a renovation that deals with the preservation, conservation of energy, and also to make spaces that are more useful for the artists themselves. In fact, the building doesn't belong to them. They only lease it, but they have a very, very long lease for 25 years up to 30 years. So that's very important that they do things. If they do something there, they build something there, it's for their own use, not for the future use of the owner. So that's a bit the trick. And within this balance is quite interesting because it's a listed building, it's a heritage, and at the same time, it's part of the wall. The artists are using it, so it's really a rundown place. It's a ruin. And how do you keep, though, and it's charming because of that. There is some beauty in this, and at the same time, they need to renovate it. So it's really like a balance. So when we looked at it the first time we went there, it was a maze. You couldn't really recognize what was the structure of this building, what was this thing. It's really a labyrinth. You go through it, you don't really, it's unreadable. So the first thing was to redraw the frame structure of the building, which is beautiful. It's very clean, it's very clear. You can go through, I mean, you can look from facade to facade. This is the side of the river. This is the interior side. But you could perforate the space. You can do whatever you want inside it. It's a factory, so it's a really open floor. In terms of making this aspect, this quality of the space visible again, together with the artist, we thought to introduce a new space that they need. It's a project space because they don't have a space where they can do exhibitions or they can do performances or can do theater pieces. So we decided to cut out of the mess of the thing, one space that is in the shape of a Y, of an epsilon, a Y. So it's a kind of an odd geometry, but it would be the only space that goes from facade to facade, from window to window. And at the same time, it's really the moment where the building folds, or one of the moments where it folds around the canal. So you see the shift in the structure. And so it would be also readable within the space. I can show you, this is a better plan of this. And we introduced something that is a stranger to it, something like a ghost, something that doesn't belong. But at the same time, it enhances the structure that is there. It makes it readable. And it is this weird triangular pillar in the middle of it. And it contains, this is something that can contain also infrastructure for them to whatever infrastructure they need, technical infrastructure they need for a project space. But at the same time, it folds around all the doors. It can be unfolded, where you can divide the space in 3 different rooms, practically. And in the same time, it highlights the structure of the beams in the ceiling, adding 3 new fake beams. They're not there, but somehow they're rotating around an axis, showing when the building is folding around the river. So that's a little bit, we call it psychotherapy by architecture, in a way, because the place is so messy and so impenetrable, in a way. And by just making one intervention and opening it up once and introducing some strange elements in it and making it more visible, in a way, it's sort of as pretending that things somehow have a certain order within the disorder, or the beauty of the disorder of the thing in itself. So that's a bit the idea. At the same time, it's a project of renovation and energetic renovation. So some of the windows are going to be changed, are going to be replaced. But in the same time, the character of the building will be kept like this. This is the long facade along the water. Oh, this is the beautiful spreadsheet. So Excel, it's the same thing as, this is the facade, practically. These are all the windows are going to be renovated in specific ways. There are many different ways of doing that, depending on the situation, because the money is tight. And, but the artists need to be warmer, not to pay tremendous amount of money for heating. So there is a certain, it's lenient, it's very sort of flexible in a way. And this is somehow the work that is happening right now. So you have this decrepit building, the facade is still sort of crumbling and falling apart. But then you have these specific moments where you have new windows in them, and somehow suggesting and highlighting also the way the building is. And we always think it's a little bit a renovation by punk in a way, because it's really looking at the situation and deciding on the situation in itself, instead of trying to clean up everything, making everything straight and invisible. All the history of the place is still there, is still readable. And okay, and it's because of the specific conditions of this place. I mean, that's everything I said before. Okay. So we have a certain law for ruins, as you could notice. Ruins are incredible. So, sorry, if I go back to this, John Ruskin, I'm a big fan of John Ruskin somehow. Beside his moralistic approach, but I really love the way he looks at buildings in terms of a building having a life and showing the life of a building, not trying to sort of encompass the moment of death. In a way, this place is going to crumble so much that it's going to be unusable. But at this moment, we're going to extend its life and make it, but not without betraying the nature of the place in itself. Does it make sense? No. Okay. A small project. This is a former chicken house. Also in Charlottenburg in Berlin. Here it stands in the middle of a beautiful garden. There is a beautiful villa here, and the entire place is also enlisted. It is under heritage protection. This was built after the war, and it was built illegally. So the client said, I want to renovate it, I want to make it into a studio. He's a product designer. But I don't want to make it visible. I don't want the Heritage Office to be too keen about this. Maybe they are going to ask me to tear it down. I don't want the neighbor to look at it and think, what is he doing there? So we need to keep it somehow hidden. And we like this idea. We want to keep it as a ruin, as sort of like the building outside sort of not really looks, not much like something. But then everything happens in the inside. And so it starts like this, where you have the part of the roof or the attics opening up and revealing the space inside. And this is the next step, where the inside is really completely transformed. And this on top, there used to be pigeons, because pigeons were also valuable animals, also because of their manure. Because it was a very rich fertilizer, so they kept pigeons on top. On the bottom there is a chicken, and the chicken had the very large windows. They were facing south, so the warmth would come in to warm up the place. And at the same time there is the chimney, and the chimney had a stove to warm up also the place. So we used everything that is there and sort of incremented it. So we used the chimney, we covered the chimney with the wooden elements. We introduced a gallery here. We have a series of steps that come up. It's a high level of details. It was many drawings for this small project. And at the same time, it sort of empowered the user to do something with the studio. It was also the explicit recommendation to do something that is highly defined, that defines a space in a very specific way, but opens up possibilities. So we concentrated all the interventions in this corner. And there are highly detailed elements, sort of a furniture staircase going up, and then the alcove on the top, the gallery on the top. The chimney becomes part of the beam, goes across, so it becomes almost like a strange dramatic cross in the middle of the space. But in the same, all the rest is open up for interpretation. So that was mostly the idea. Okay, now, are we still good with the time? Okay, good. These are things that I'm going to show you a little more quickly, hopefully. We started to be invited to do more architecture for exhibitions. And this happened last year for the Berlin Biennial. We did the architecture for the Kunstwerke and the Akademie der Künste. So 2 places for this very large contemporary art exhibition. The curator was Gabin Kobo, and for her, she's required to have architects to work with her because she was very much interested in the 2 places. And she wanted to have also an architectural definition of the place before she started bringing in the art. So first there was a design, and then she started deciding which artworks were going to be placed where. So that's, well, this is just a diagram of the Kunstwerke. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You have the Auguststrasse on this side, you have a narrow entrance here, you have a long courtyard here. And then you enter the space, which became sort of famous in the 90s. It was a former factory of margarine, very banal building, nothing really beautiful about it, nothing special. But they started to use it. Biesenbach was the first one who started to use it as the first biennial. It was founded by him and whatever, Obrist and blah, blah, blah. And then an extension was added to make it more precious. It's sort of an awkward extension that doesn't really fit. It's like a real art space that opens up and with skylights, like the things you expect in a gallery. But somehow it doesn't really do it. It's still very banal as a space. So we dealt with this, with the nature of the building in itself. And what we did was to look at the irregularities of the space in itself and using them for the drywalling that we introduced for the exhibition space, the new exhibition spaces inside. Yeah, maybe I go back to this. In this case, the picture shows you this idealized geometry of an octagon, one of the main entrances that we decided to introduce, sort of redrawing the space, but also highlighting the ceilings and the way the ceilings are without really polishing them. So there is this disconnection between the octagon and the space of the ceiling above. In this case, this is on the first floor, I think. We decided to use this 45-degree wall and to repeat it in the structure. So you have it everywhere. And in terms of repeating these elements and at the same time making also the structure of the ceiling more visible. Also the beams that run through are much more readable in this way. This is a punctured space. We didn't do that. They did it way back because they thought we also need a proper double height space. So we thought also bizarre, but we worked with that. And this is just how the space starts practically with this 45-degree section. This is a view through this space, which also has these weird angles, 45 degrees, of course. This is looking back. And also, it's always in dialogue. It's always in a conversation with the existing. So that's what, and it wasn't introducing special geometries out of the irregularities of the space in itself, and at the same time not concealing anything from the building. And in fact, you see things like this, where you see the decrepit ceilings or bits of plaster that connect to the beam here, and the entrance to the 45-degree space that I showed you before. And again, this is the top floor. We also introduced weird geometries of the triangle and the square space. But this is a story we wanted to tell, this beam and these pillars that go through this space. Yeah, this is it. Where you have this counterpoint of the geometry with the existing. And these are the things that we find exciting. Another, this is the Akademie der Künste in Ansaviertel. That's the other part of the biennial. In this case, I'm just going to show you the main hall. This is again a shed hall, like the Gallery Kollege Bauer I showed you before. It's a building that was built in the 60s by Sabine Schumann and Werner Duttmann, very famous. And it was conceived through light. Light was the major element through the space, so that's why you have a shed hall, so you have light coming in from above. And you also have light from here, because these are all windows practically. All this frame that goes around the space is all lit from above. In the past years, everything has been concealed, there's been covered because there's been more and more exhibitions with certain requirements, so there is no natural light that is allowed in this space. So you cannot read the height of the space. This moment is not visible. The height of the space is practically not there. And this was the first idea that we brought in. We said we need to make it visible, and we make it visible by introducing an artificial cross-section. So we introduce walls that meet the ceiling, and they bring in somehow a strange cross-section through the space. So the height is completely visible. Maybe I show you better. This is a picture of it. So we have this drywall and it goes up. It was very important to go up to the ceiling. We cannot use it for the art in this case because it was really predestined for these paintings, for these drawings. But at the same time, the space is so much more powerful. And it's really, the beauty of it is really there, again, back, without the use of natural light. Of course, we tried to open light wherever was possible. And in this case, I'm just showing you a series of images. Just the use of drywalling and using these differences in height to perceive the power of the space in itself. And there are also differences. There is a lower wall, and then it goes up again to the side, so you can really play with that. In this case, we were able to open the windows. There are many, there is an internal courtyard, and there is a garden. That's supposed to bring the light in, but it wasn't there. I mean, we had to open that. And this is also kind of a strange picture. It's such a, yeah, we took it after the art was gone, so we were able to take these pictures as well, even though it was part of the art as well. The subject of bringing in always strange elements. We always like to work with that. We always use constraint with that, but we like to play with that. In this case, these are cardboard pillars. And I don't know if you're familiar with James Sterling, who's like trying to sort of, he's always introducing large pillars that are a copy from Le Corbusier, but then they are 3 times larger. So they become really funny, ridiculous, and he paints them yellow or orange. Amazing British architect, who unfortunately is already dead. But this is our inspiration. In this case, this is a side space from the large hall I showed you before. And in this case, we introduced these things that don't hold anything. They're there only to give rhythm to the space. And they're attached to this sort of frame, wooden frame on the top. And it was really interesting to see the viewers who would come in and they would just lean onto them, thinking that they were really concrete beings. So that was kind of a nice experience to see that. So that's just a little pleasure there. Another exhibition where we did the architecture in Warsaw for the Museum of Modern Art. The curator was Natalia Selewicz. Very beautiful exhibition. In this case, the work of the architecture came together with the artwork. First, we were shown all the paintings that were going to be exhibited. It's an exhibition about paintings, and all the artists are women. And it's called Paint, also known as Blood. It's beautiful, very intense exhibition, very ambivalent, very violent, very sexual. And so it was an amazing collaboration with the curator, because we really worked. We did workshops in Berlin and in Warsaw. We traveled back and forth to really see the space the way also the curator wished to see it for the art. She had been chosen for 5 years, so it was a long work of research on her side. As you know, maybe you know, in Warsaw, the Museum of Modern Art is a temporary building. And this temporary building was designed by Adolf Christianitz, an Austrian architect, and he built it first for Berlin. It used to be on the plaza where now the large King Palace has been built, and it was a temporary Kunsthalle, a temporary art gallery, art exhibition space. So it's done extremely cheaply, and it can be also dismantled and reconstructed. So it was donated to Warsaw until they built the new museum. Christianitz didn't have much money, and he invested all his money in the proportion of the space. Otherwise, everything is inexpensive about the place. But there is a beautiful central hall, very, very high, and then you have the side rooms with a wardrobe, a library, bookstore, and a restaurant. We try to increase, to work with this symmetry that he uses, because it's kind of challenging. In fact, either you become pathetic when you work with such a large space, the one in the middle, or it becomes ridiculously small, that it doesn't really have an effect on the space. So we had really to find a balance within this. You used a point symmetry, where we used, again, a symmetric space. We introduced simply this wall, these dry walls, and everything was based on the circulation. And the core of the circulation was this center, where people would be forced to cross. And maybe the pictures are more telling about this thing. This was the day after the opening, so we were able to take ready photographs. And this is the crossing. And this moment becomes a maze, because you lose somehow slightly the orientation at this point. And this was also an idea from the nature of the art that was exhibited there, to lose orientation, to lose the cliches, perhaps, or the prejudice, and at the same time to create intense spaces. Triangular spaces can be extremely intense. So that was also the purpose. And very simple, but also the people who built it, the people there were amazing. They built it in such a beautiful way. It was so accurate. It was so thought through. It was a pleasure. Yeah, it was a real pleasure. And these are the impossible spaces you also achieve with a triangular space, where you have the paintings really facing you so close. But that was intention. Okay, we come to the last. Okay, I hope it's not too much. Okay, the last. This is really. Well, I talked maybe about the teaching. This is a very long, ongoing project. We started in 2013. It's called, it's sort of the history of ecology within modernity, not outside modernity. And in a way, it's a challenge, because we always used to think modernity is opposite to nature, opposite to ecological thinking. And instead, we were commissioned first to do a small research by the Martin Elsässer Stiftung, which is an institution. It's a private institution, association, if you want. Martin Elsässer was a famous architect from the modern movement in Germany, from Frankfurt. And we were asked to start a research on this because of a landscape architect. But I'll tell you later about this. First, I show you what we did with our students in Nuremberg. We started doing research in this and looking at models of ecological thinking within modernity, but also throughout history. So there wasn't really a constraint of an historical moment, even though many of the models, many of the projects were very much focused around the 1920s or the late 19th century, if you want. So in a way, many thoughts modeled that reacted to the Industrial Revolution, and they brought different kind of approaches, more holistic approaches for modernity. This is one of the readers we did with our students in Nuremberg. That was 2016. Sun, shit, compost, and air, of course. And together we also we organized a field trip to Iran. And that was also a revelation. We wanted to study, first of all, Tehran from this point of view, from the ecological point of view. But at the same time, we sort of abandoned the modern city and we went south, and we found an artifact that sort of contained all these aspects that we were curious about, we were looking for. And in this case, it's a clay house. It's a 200-year courtyard house. It's in Nain. It's a city between Yazd and Kashan, so it's in the southern part of Iran. And the city is been in the course of renovation, but there is a section that is still very ancient. And unfortunately, they're tearing it down. So we were confronted as architects, you can imagine, with a live sort of cross-section that was there, to visible, something that it's amazing. Cross-sections are so amazing. They show you what's not there, what's not visible. So it's such an amazing tool. Anyway, it was there to be seen, and we noticed the proportions of the spaces were incredible. They were amazing. They were so beautiful. And so we, with the students, we sort of stepped in this ruin, which had all the elements that talk about a life in the desert, that of a sustainable life in the desert, working with the climate, working with the processes that are there. As an example, the wind towers, they cool the space, and in the same time they pull out the hot air. The Kanat system, which is a room below the ground that connects to the canals that draw the water from the mountains far away. It's a very ancient infrastructure in Iran, thousands of years or old, amazing, and still working. And so you have this, the cooling of the space through the garden, which is sunken in. And then this amazing, and with the students we did a survey, so that's mostly what I wanted to show you, where all these elements are visible in the state of a ruin. Of course, this is still a ruin, but all the elements are there to be understood. So you have here the room where you have the access to the water below the ground. It's connected to the garden, the courtyard, which is here. Here are the part of the house that is used in the summer, which is cooler and deeper. This is the part of the house used in the winter, which is warmer, because of course you have very high temperature differences throughout the day as well as throughout the year. And in the same time you have the wind towers, which is also the cooling system that works together with this part of the house. So you have entire environmental controlling, environmental climatic controlling. That is amazing. That is so beautiful and so ancient. So much knowledge in this. So that's mostly to lead you to Lichtluftscheise, the last thing, the exhibition in Berlin, also in two places in collaboration also with the Nappaschatz Academy in Prinzessin Garden, where they did the public program. Sylvan Linden and I, and together with Florian Wust, who is a film curator, we curated this thing, and which took place in the Botanical Garden Museum and the Neue Gesellschaft für Bildende Kunst, which is an independent art institution in Berlin. So Lichtluftscheise, light, air, and shit, versus light, air, and sun, which is the triad of Le Corbusier, of course, the main words or terms in modern architecture. In this case, Scheise, of course, stands for something else, as a resource, also together with the air and the light. That's a bit... Okay, this is a small... We were approached by the Martin Elsässer Stiftung because they had a connection to Lebrecht Migge, this landscape architect, who in the 20s did an experiment which was called Sun Island. It was on an island in Berlin. And together with Elisabeth Assessor, they constructed or enlarged the area, this island, which is a swamp, with household garbage, which was very experimental. Back then in the 20s, it was nobody ever had done such a thing, to enlarge an island, to make more landfill with the garbage. And at the same time, they constructed a very large garden that would allow for self-sustenance. So that was their experiment. And they implemented all kinds of devices, such as recycling of human feces, building walls to increase the production in the garden, to calculate how much land a family, as an example of 5 people, would need to sustain themselves with a minimum amount of land. So this happened here, and this is one of the last projects of this landscape architect who died then in 1935. So he started it like in the late 20s together with Elisabeth and Assessor, and then he died, and then she stayed there, and she lived there throughout the war, together with her husband and her family, who moved in some sort of inner exile during the war. And they lived out of this island as well. So why was it, this is the island as it is now, it's a nature protection area. And this is the house. It's a minimal amount of house they needed to live, to have shelter, because the notion was to maximize the garden and minimize the dwelling. But at the same time, the garden was conceived as a core to build the city, as a main element of production and of also liberating somehow also the workers from the work in the factory in order to sustain themselves, to allow themselves to really sustain the family without recurring to wage work. This is a very interesting model by Leberth Migge. It's the idea of using all the waste produced by the city, feces, garbage, everything that is collected into, he calls it a mountain of garbage, and here the canal hydra. It means that all the feces, all the waste is thrown out into the canals instead of being used, and taking it up to a new sort of garden like this. He calls it the garbage tree, where the garbage tree is the sort of the metaphor to reuse all these resources, which means that the city, if you look at it from the point of the garden, becomes a construct of production versus a machine of consumption. I would say this is a very radical way of thinking the city, and something that we might need right now. So this was something that we were really curious about, and he made also a plan for Berlin, for an extension of Berlin based on this project, of the garden as a core, to expand the city and to recycle everything that comes out of the city. At the same time, this is nothing new. He was very much inspired by an agronomist who traveled throughout Asia in China and Japan, Franklin King, who did a survey of the way, as an example, in Shanghai, they recycled all human feces and they were taken out to the land for agriculture, for the use in agriculture, and were composted. So the canals were the infrastructure to take out all these resources that were coming from the city. And they were also the same infrastructure that would take in the produce, of course, the fresh produce that would come from the countryside. So you can see also the analogy between this diagram and this diagram, of course. Leberth Migge very much was into the books by King in this case. And out of the book is also this book by King. This is a picture from a village in nearby Shanghai, where you have this compost mounds collected inside the village, and they look almost like sculpture. They're really valuable elements that belong to the life in the village itself. What I wanted to say something else. Yeah, you have to think about that. This kind of agriculture was done without animals, so that's why they didn't have manure. So they're really based on recycling human feces. Yeah, so that's very radical. Oh, okay. Just to give you the span of the exhibition, and there was a large amount of research. This is one of my favorite. This is the Biotope map of Berlin, which was done in the 80s. So looking at the city throughout the centuries and looking for models that dealt with an ecological thinking of reusing, recycling resources. In this case, it's West Berlin, mapped in the 80s, where all the open areas are perceived as very valuable resources. And the entire city is mapped as a biotope, also the constructed areas. Everything is a biotope, everything is nature at the same time. So that was kind of very exciting to discover that. For me, it's also very much relates to the Tiergarten, the park in the middle of the city that was very much affected by this plan, this thinking in the 80s. Just to give you an idea of the city of Berlin, after the war, it was destroyed. It was a pile of rubble, but this pile of rubble was growing with the exotic plants. If you, maybe I'm taking it a bit far away. If you know a seed that is dug in, by building a city, you build foundations. Seeds are put under the ground, and they can survive for centuries. And if they're coming up to the surface because of the bombing in this way, I mean, it's kind of a tragic moment, but because of the bombing, so many seeds came out to the surface. Seeds that were like centuries old started to germinate, and very brand new plants that never really existed for many years in the city started to bloom, to blossom. So the perception of the city completely changed. It became a large biotope. That's the reason why they decided to do this mapping and to plan the city in terms of biotopes, making these biotopes grow, not recede. So that's something also very much radical. Okay, so that's, there are many guidelines in this biotope about increasing the life form in the city, not only the human life, also the life of plants and animals. Of course, the owl is something pretty. We like to have owls in the city, but the biotope map also addresses cockroaches and insects and spiders and all kind of animals that we don't necessarily like, but they are part of the city, and we should give them space, they say. In their categories, they did. Amazing. Oh, this is a bit, I mean, I'm taking you really to, it's a bit like pulling your hair in this, but I hope it's okay. Just to give you the span of the research, because we go back into the past and we look at Darwin. Charles Darwin did this amazing book about worms and the action of worms on our planet. And it's a beautiful way because look at this book, we realize what is the impact of this very humble animal in the earth that is sort of churning up everything it's wasted and is thrown away, churning it up and make it into soil, into topsoil. And these are the casting of a worm, of course, very, very beautiful. But what they do is that this is Darwin observing for 20 years, and he looked at Stonehenge. And the stones that were placed there by humans were sunken in, and they changed sort of position and were tilted. And they were not just tilted because of their weight, but because of the work of the worms around them for many, many years. So you change your perspective and you see that the worms are actually shaping our planet, ideally speaking, and not necessarily humans. So that's kind of it's something that we also took in the exhibition as an approach. And now we just go to the space very briefly. Two spaces, NGBK. Also, Igor was also part of it, very much part of it. Yeah, terrible space, NGBK Berlin, an L shape, long, deep, dark, horrible. What do you do? So we also worked here with 45-degree angles, introducing, we recycled pieces from the previous exhibition. We recycled plywood, and we inserted it in this we inserted this new geometry that builds a room. Suddenly, instead of a corner room, you have a triangular room here, where you can exhibit things, and it becomes a space in itself of its own, with its own dignity in a way. The last space also, it's usually horrible, it's always dark, and there is a window here with which we open. We also open a hole in it. Anyway, this is just, but I think the pictures will be better to explain. So what you see here is also this, the way you're supposed to perceive it. You go from, each corner is connected, and it leads you inside the space. So that's also something that we used in the geometry very much. We very, very, very big awareness. So you see here this sequence of walls. We decided to leave the walls unpainted, to leave them as they are. And the artifacts are a combination of facsimile, but also original artifacts in vitrines or paintings and so on. What we were keen also is to show these moments where, the room here, you have this corner room, and here you have the gap, where you see still the being that is sort of defining the edge of the room in itself. You probably see it here. That's the gap. That's everything. You need this, in order to show that there is this. That's a little thing that informs you. And this is at the end, okay, this is open in the sun to allow some light to come in. Botanical Garden Museum, the last one. Botanical Garden Museum is a very difficult space. It's a very classic space beside this room, which is existing. It's a round room for projections and didactic room. It's a didactic museum, so they don't have temporary exhibitions. It was really one-time moment where we could do this because it's going to be renovated for the next 3 years. We could change it. It's a very classic with vitrines and a sequence of rooms. And what we did, we changed the rooms completely. We introduced a new diagonal wall. We took the divisional walls, we took them away. This misplaced the vitrines that were there. And then, of course, in this case, we had artists to exhibit it. So they did their own installation within the space. These are the misplaced vitrines at the beginning. Vitrines that are closed off with the work by Krzysztof Kukula, a Polish artist. You see these weird angles that you achieve by sort of resetting the elements in space, in which we really were looking forward to this. Also commenting upon this sort of museum, this very, very heavy, very pedagogical, very not malleable space. These are the things that are interesting for us, the gaps that come out of the placement of this long wall, the diagonal wall. And in this case, this is the work by New Territories together with, this is François Roche, Miki Tamori, Max Unterfrauner, Stepan Kraulek, and Helvis Savikis. This is the installation. Okay. The round wall, we made it visible by taking away the plaster, so the artists could place their own things. So that's something also we like to do. Okay, I keep going. This is diagonal space. You see these artifacts that happen and these mistakes that we left. And this is the last image. Just the artwork is being taken away, but you see the space of the vitrines, these weird moments created by the resetting. And with this, I'm done. I hope it was okay. Good. All right. Thank you. That was a long one.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Do you need some?
No, I'm fine.
water
I'm
or
fine.
something?
No. Yeah, I can drink some water, but it's. I'm ready. If you have questions.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope there will be many questions because it was quite provocative. I mean, in some sense of.
It's the first time I do such a long lecture, I must say. Usually it's much shorter.
Okay, you succeeded quite a long one.
Okay.
No, I was always thinking about as you developed your speech, I was always thinking about complexity and contradiction. And
yeah, true.
Having it in mind, and so this would perhaps be my first question: how you relate, or if you refer to this kind of guru of postmodernism, like Robert Venturi, and you mentioned James Stirling,
yeah.
which I love him so much as well, or his work.
Yeah.
So how is your relation to this part of architecture history? Because on the other hand, you explained that, okay, you are somehow concentrating on modernity and on this kind of even the way how you explained this sustainable way of arranging or organizing a life in the city.
Yeah.
It was somehow related to modernity, which I was not so sure if I
It is very modern. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, this is something I didn't say. This is it's an economic model in a way. It's modernity thought from an economic point of view.
So you mean
it's not ecological. It's more rationalistic, especially from the point of view of Lebrecht Miguel, this landscape architect who was active in the modern movement. He never thought about ecology. Ecology wasn't really a topic for him, but economy. And so what makes sense to do in order to make out of the existing, of the conditions of the existing, the best out of it. And that was mostly his own approach. And also living following the means that are available. I mean, that's also a bit, and you asked me about, if it is in contradiction, I mean, being fascinated by the structural elements of a building doesn't mean that just to be confined to those elements in themselves. I think it's important always to have a narrative, a spatial narrative that that can continue. There isn't just one ideal state. If you're referring now, if you go to Stirling or to Venturi, we think there isn't an ideal state. Spaces are stories, and you can keep writing on them. There is always different approaches. I mean, I think form is still is a very important aspect of the way we live space and we understand space, and space makes us powerful or empowers us to use it, and that's why it's a bit of an economy is also part of it. It's not necessarily being completely decadent and completely out of. Really stepping out of the conditions of the situation. I think it's more about observing how a structure works and functions, and then what is that we need to overlap in order to make it work better now, within the present, within this moment. And that's mostly there. That's a moment where we're taking input from the people living there, using it, or the context, the historical context, and there are so many things feeding into the project. And so that's, and I think that's also part of the economy. It's a feedback loop we get from the space in a way. So for me, there is no contradiction between modernity and postmodernity. I mean, that's not, I know there is a lot of discussion there, but I can cope with that. I think this is...
how you use terms that are actually somehow in a very conventional way connected with, let's say, postmodern phrases.
True.
Like,
it's true.
Pretending or fake or something like this. But actually the result is not the same. So
it's not the same, yeah. It's
again,
not
kind of reinventing.
Yeah, it's not only playful. It's always commenting on the existing in a way. It's always a comment or a conversation with the existing. I think that's perhaps the main, where I would say there is like a common ground for everything that we did so far, or where we are curious. We're like, and I always love when architecture makes you laugh. And you look at this and and you have this strange laughter because it doesn't belong, or it's strange, or the size doesn't fit, or it's, so that's...
Okay, so please, now it's time for your questions, remarks. If you have any, please go.
I would like to ask a question
Oh, sorry, I didn't see. I'm sorry, I saw. I didn't see. I need a moderation. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much also for your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
So you say now that there's some kind of humor in between the play you put with repeating some certain irregular elements and making them almost regular.
Yeah.
It's really like you almost have inside jokes as your team as an architect to put in the project. And it's really nice. But I'm wondering, do you want the visitors to break through that they see that sometimes it's fake structure? Do you want them to recognize the real one because you fake it?
It's not a didactic process what I propose. I mean, I don't want the people to be overwhelmed or to feel the weight of the designer. It should be a certain lightness into it, so that's you might perceive it, and you might not perceive it. I found nice for the Biennale that the people started leaning on the cardboard pillars, because they thought they belonged. They're really part of the structure, the historical structure. So they, but it's no. I think it would be too much. I think it's something that should be in the background, like sort of a. And if people see it, I mean, of course, I mean, you force them a little bit to see. I mean, you see this weird angle there. People go to ask, but sometimes they don't. You know, that's also part of the space in itself. But at the same time, it feels a lot different than the museum used to be, because really, like, it was a series of regular rooms, one after the next one, very, very, you know, very heavy. You know, this place stinks really physically. It has a smell. And you come in and you really feel the weight of the institution. As soon as you introduce these weird corners and you change the placement of the vitrines and things, it becomes, people came in and started smiling. That's what I liked, yeah. That's what I liked. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just wondering, like, the process of creating of these spaces, is it like you have intention and you know what is the result going to be like, or is it that you are experimenting and then observing the result and being like surprised by it? Like, is there any intention, for example, in those angles, or is it just like experiment and let's see what it will.
No. In this case, it was very conscious. As I said, the museum felt extremely heavy, and the institution was frozen. They couldn't move anymore. I mean, also the apparatus above was tremendous. It was, of course, insane. Kafkaesque. It was really, and so we really intentionally wanted to place things in the wrong order in order to make the things happen here, to make it more. So the corners are really much studied. I mean, the angles are very regular. They're usually 45 degrees. They're not just random. They were very much studied by doing 3D modeling as well as of course on the floor plan. Of course, we tried many different ways, but there was the idea to make this place feel that is something is transforming, that is moving, that is commenting on itself, because in a way, also the paradox was this: it's a botanical museum, so they have this their own conscious is to think that they are on the good side, they are on the side of ecology. At the same time, Botanical Garden Museum were born out of the colonial operations where countries, like Portugal, Spain, whatever, Holland, France, they would just send out explorers to collect plants and send them back to send back to the country in order to collect them, because they became resources. All these precious plants, all these precious fruits that were replanted in France or in other places. They were producing an economy. They were really valuable. They were worth gold. So the Botanical Garden Museum, the Latour, he calls them calculating machines. They're like they're calculators that contain all the knowledge, all the specimens that have been collected since the last 300 years. And this is, they collect, this is the economy of the thing. So in a way, it's very ambivalent, the background of this place. And so based on that knowledge, we started rethinking space and making it, you know, that the space would comment itself. That would be strangely wrong also. That's a bit, but never randomly. The geometry is usually very accurate that we introduce, even though it's wrong. Okay. All right. Okay.
Some more questions from your side.
Okay.
Hi. I wanted to ask you about you were talking about the Berlin as it was destroyed after the war and the seeds that resurfaced, which I find extremely amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Does it actually somehow was taken into account when planning, like the new plan of Berlin, of the destroyed districts, or?
The new plan of Berlin when after the war.
Yeah.
If that was taken into consideration,
Yes.
that phenomenon. In part, yes, it was taken in. In fact, there were many effects from the Biotope map. There were many interesting parks that were born out of the of wild vegetation. And they're really central in the city. You can find them, and they're really this oasis of wilderness in the middle of the city. There aren't very many. Probably the plan of these people who worked on the Biotope map, they wanted way more. They wanted to see really a sort of a city that would become wilder and wilder, increasingly wilder, also in their daily operations, like leaving the leaves. You know, the maintenance of the city would be really cut down. So everything would sort of, we would be like, look in disarray would be everywhere. This is what they imagined. But there were many interesting parks that are existing. As an example, I don't know, there's a park south of Tempodrome. It's very close to the Landwehr Canal, and it's amazing. It's sprout of wild vegetation, and the only thing they did was introduce a few paths, few trails, and that's it. And it usually came out of the disbanded railroad tracks and disbanded stations that were bombed or destroyed after the war. So those are the areas that we still have from that were an effect of that study. And of course, there are certain districts that deal with wild vegetation in a different way. Like Kreuzberg has a very futuristic way of dealing with wild plants. They keep more of those. They keep more of the disarray, of the disorderly aspect of natural processes. And the other districts are more strict, more clean. But that's something that is, it's worth discussing for every city in a way. One of the pictures I showed you before was actually London. London was also like that. It was after the Blitz was also very much destroyed. And that's the picture of the cockroach comes from a book that is called London's Natural History. And it was published in 1945 with a documentation of the destroyed city after the war and taking in the nature that was blooming and like taking over the city at that time. So, and in London as well, there were interesting consequences. There are very interesting natural parks, tiny, unfortunately, but they were the product of that. And you're asking now if it's still in process. I mean, the city, the way it's developing right now.
I mean, well, they had to rebuild.
They had to rebuild. Back then, there was more consciousness, also because it was West Berlin was enclosed by the wall, so all the green areas, the open areas, were highly valuable, and the people were really fighting for them. There were many initiatives by the citizens of Berlin that protested in order not to keep the areas the way they were. Also, Tiergarten was kept in a certain way because of that moment. So it was also it's a paradox. You have a wall that encloses the city. Irénée Scalbert uses this beautiful analogy. He says it's like Robinson Crusoe who's fencing in what can be saved from civilization. For the West Berliner, they were trying to save what was still nature within the city, because they were enclosed by a wall, so they couldn't go outside. So everything that was open was very precious, even though it was just a wasteland. It was precious. Yeah. So a different mind setting for sure than now. And yeah, it's sad, but yeah, it's strange. Yeah, that's a strange, such a paradox. Yeah.
I mean, it's a certain kind of going back to this idea nowadays that
yeah.
this is why you are discussing it, this
Yeah.
is why you are researching it, this is why it is so present in the many strategies of like developing greenery in
Yeah.
cities.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'm correct, please just tell me. In Berlin there was in parallel to this kind of exotic wildlife after the bombing, there was also a very intense, let's say, a private agriculture in frame of this ruins.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah, true. It's true. Yeah.
like inventing a new way of sitting.
Yeah.
This exotic
It's true.
jungle vegetation, and at the same time with these small gardens and small fields to just produce the elementary.
To sustain themselves. Yeah, there were many.
Also something.
Yeah,
that we
absolutely. Yeah,
should,
of
again,
course.
think about
Yeah,
what we are
yeah,
thinking about.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's a long tradition also in Berlin because of the Industrial Revolution. The people, the workers also. There is this garden colonies, as you know. You probably have them everywhere. Many places in Northern Europe, I think. That's
we have it
yeah,
there, so it's
yeah.
very
But it's true that you say this. The wasteland that was resulted by the bombing became also a way of appropriation also. There are spaces that become free and interpretable. And you have all this nature exotic, and at the same time there is a possibility to do something there. I think in one of the pictures I showed you, I think there was also a couple of gardens that were also within the rubble. So that's it changes the mindset completely. Mm.
But this is what I wanted to ask. What was the response of students and of public when receiving results of this kind of research? Was it like, okay, let's start to do this recycling processes again? Surroundings?
Well,
let's
there are
start doing it in our own garden?
there are many experiments. This is.
Opposite.
No. That was amazing. I thought the response of the visitors was incredible. And the students I don't know, at least my experience is that they're very curious about this. And they're very keen also because they see something in their future that is there, that is valuable to look at this. And, but no, the visitors was amazing, was really great. I'm just looking at this because of the maybe the scope of the project was so large, also touching two institutions, very different institutions, doing two exhibitions at the same time. It was a bit overwhelming. Also having a public program at the Princessinnen Garden, it was just way too much. But every time we were able to see the visitors, and we gave a lot of tours, and the talks, the feedback was incredible. Also, everybody was very interested and very excited. I don't know if there is an immediate translation into a practical thing, an experimental thing. I hope so. That would be. I hope some students did. They did build a turf toilet and so on. But that's, yeah. I think there is still a long way until you have some such concept being really part of what you call urbanity or urban structure. We need somehow a new definition of the city in itself, or of nature also, a new definition of nature, what we think, or our part in nature. That's all subjects that are being discussed at the moment very much, and there is an urgency for that. That's yes. Yeah.
There are some more questions from your side, from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
You were showing a few details, for example, the plywood that didn't go all the way up to the roof, all to the ceiling. Also, the plaster was on the one corner. It looked like it wasn't finished, and you were
Yeah,
Some people might, take those details as
mistakes.
imperfections.
Is what?
Imperfection.
Imperfection, yes.
So what is
Yeah.
your opinion about those details? Do you
Yeah.
think they are like something special, something that makes this place characteristic, or are those imperfections? Or
Well, there, in this case, maybe I can go back to the drawing so I can show you. You're talking about this in the middle, yeah. And this shows the beam. I mean, this is important because this makes all the difference. Otherwise, it would be a continuous wall, which would be okay, beautiful, nice. Of course, yeah, to pull it up, to take in all the beams here, that would have been too much work. So we stopped here. But in this case, you see the bearing structure in the back, the wall, the corner of the space. It reveals something that is there, but at the same time concealed, that is not there anymore. It's a double thing. I'll show you in the plan. Maybe that's here. This is actually where, this is the thing. This is the corner of the wall. And this is usually how the space is. And this informs you that is something different behind. It might not give you precise information, but I think there is a different awareness from that gap. It might look like an imperfection, but it's actually an information. I think that's important for the space. Otherwise, it would be, yeah, it's your decision, of course, what you want to tell the people. But in this case, you're suggesting something that is important there. And maybe one might look a little closer and discover that actually there is a wall. Oh, yeah, there is a wall in the back. That's a structure. That's a full wall in the back. And it's different geometry. Yeah. And, yeah.
I think that's exactly the kind of the inside joke that the other colleague had in
Yeah.
mind when talking about this.
Yeah.
That the regular visitors might not be able to perceive it, but
It's okay.
the written plan is like perfectly obvious and
Yeah.
it's beautiful detail,
Hmm.
but it's like
Yeah.
such an effort into something that might not be appreciated.
It's not much of an effort. It's always okay. Yeah, it's true. You're right. You're right. Might not be appreciated, but it's okay.
You know that it's there. And you're
It's there. It makes me happy. At least it makes me happy. But I'm sure. I think you underestimate the visitors.
Okay.
You might. Yeah. I think there is. I don't know. That's my experience. As people start to be. They see the care. There is something that is being done with a purpose. And they see something, and then they look closer. They ask questions, or they start looking around. And it's quite surprising what people discover, actually. People are not trained architects. That's it's quite surprising, yeah. No, I think it makes a difference.
Okay, because I was kind of like taking me back to the beginning of the lecture where you show us those pagodas with
Yeah.
the like prefabricated elements of the reconstruction.
Yeah.
And it's also something that not everybody can notice.
Mm-hmm. True.
So I was always thinking that like how much of
Yeah.
it was the same question already.
Yeah.
You answered that.
Yeah.
And you're adding something that is not readable
Yeah.
to everybody. So
It's true. But if you look closer, you see those elements are much more polished, and then they repeat themselves. And you almost get nauseous. You get disturbed and say, oh, again, this element. While the rest of the structure might be all crumbling and beautiful, full of texture, full of details. And then you see these things, and they stand up, and then you go, there's something wrong here. And then you start thinking, why? Is it mass-produced? And you start thinking. And I think that's, in that case, it's quite kind of the opposite, and trying to sort of, it's an economy that is based on that, sort of cheap and quick economy. But I think I think people see that. I think eventually, when you see like 100 of those temples, and you see many, when you go there, because there are so many, you start reading that. It's a language. Yeah. That's yeah, but it's.
What I really like about this example is that the gap, as you call it, information.
Yeah.
Actually, when we think about like what defines information is a difference that makes difference. It makes sense, for example. And so in this sense, it's like a beautiful definition of information itself.
Yeah.
In a spatial sense.
Yeah, in a spatial structure also. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Space is information. That's good. Yeah.
Do we have some more questions? You have the last possibility.
Or comments.
Or comments, yes. Or some explanations.
Anyway, these are great questions. I really love the discussion. It's really sensitive, very refined. Yeah, that's. If I try to explain this in Munich, they go.
You are too strict.
I'm very strict. Munich.
We are always very critical against our own institutions. As well.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
But if you don't have any other questions, then we will not torture you again.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No, it's all good. Great.
Are you okay with this kind of explanations? So you are, because you are obliged to write your essays.
Wow.
So is everything clear? No more questions? So then I would like to thank you once again for this
Thank you also.
amazing and very, I would say, not only enthusiastic, but somehow provocative and inspirative.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.